Here we go. Madam Chairman. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 1214 and pursuant to House Resolution 236 reports the bill back to the House. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to repeal mandatory funding for school-based health center construction.
Would members please vacate the well and take your conversations off the floor? Thank you. Would members please take your conversation out of the well and off the floor? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the bill?
I am in its current form.
The gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I ask to reserve a point of order. And I would also point out I cannot hear a word you're saying from the chair.
The gentleman's point of order is reserved. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. McCarthy of New York moves to recommit the bill H.R. 1214 to the Committee on Energy and Commerce with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment.
The gentlewoman is correct. The House is not in order. Would the members please take their conversations off the floor? I'm waiting. Will continue.
In Section 1, add at the end the following. C, publication of names and locations of applicants who will not receive grants. Not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this Act, the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall publish on the public website of the Department of Health and Human Services the names and locations of each school-based health center or sponsoring facility that has an application for a grant under Section 4101A of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, 42 U.S.C. 280H-4, pending at the time of the repeal of such Section 4101A by this Act.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to offer a motion to recommit to this misguided bill. It's important to note that this motion is simply a final amendment to the bill.
The gentlewoman will suspend. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you. It's important to note that this motion is simply a final amendment to the bill and will not kill the bill, as the majority may claim. School-based health centers are on the front lines of preventive care, and preventative care saves lives and saves money, and school-based centers are on the front lines of preventative care. As a nurse for over 30 years, I know that prevention can keep people out of the emergency rooms that taxpayers help fund, and it keeps them from needing expensive procedures and medicines that drive up insurance costs. Patients seen at school-based centers, for example, cost Medicaid an average of $30 less than comparable non-school-based health center patients. School-based health centers play an important role in treating sports concussions and halting the spread of infectious diseases like the flu. School-based centers also have a positive effect on our educational system. They have been shown to increase academic performance and reduce absenteeism. For example, a recent study found that students who use high school centers had a 50% reduction in absenteeism and 25% reduction in lateness. Many students also increased their grade point averages over time compared to students who did not use school-based health centers. Finally, it is a sad fact that sometimes these centers are a student's only source of health care. So we are faced today with legislation that attacks the preventative health care work done by our school-based health centers. H.R. 1214 is an upsetting piece of legislation, but that's not surprising at all. After all, this bill is coming from the same conference that just voted to end Medicare as we know it. Both the Republican budget and this legislation today are penny-wise and pound-foolish. It approaches the cut prevention care for Americans who need it the most. And the worst common denomination, both measures go against the most vulnerable Americans, the elderly and the children. The Republican majority passed a reckless budget before the recess, and they are opposed to pass this reckless piece of legislation today. I offer this motion to recommit today to highlight the terrible impacts of the Republican approach in this legislation. This motion to recommit is simply, again, a final amendment. It will not kill the bill. My motion to recommit requires the names and locations of each school-based health center that has applied for a grant under the program that the Republican Party would end today, to be posted on a publicly available website. This way, we will be able to all see very clearly the damage that this Republican proposal will cause. Like many of my colleagues, a school-based health center in my district would be denied funding under this bill. One of my hospitals in my district, Winthrop University Hospital, has been partnering with Hempstead High School to run a school-based health center. This school-based health center has 1,500 students and enrolled has 6,000 visits from students each year.
The gentleman is correct. The House is not in order. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Winthrop University Partnership operates in one of my most underserved communities. About 50% of students who use this school-based health center are uninsured. Let me say that again. Half of all the students who use this health center are uninsured. For most parts, the school-based health center in Hempstead High School is the only access to medical care that they have. The grant that this center applied for will help them serve this population who has nowhere else to turn. I'm going to stand with those students and their families and protect Winthrop Hempstead High School Health Center. I hope that other members will choose to stand with their constituents as well. Should this bill become law, those members who voted for this bill will have to answer to their communities who would have a vital link to health care cut off. I should also like to note some misinformation that is being spread by the supporters of H.R. 1214. They claim that these grants aren't needed because they're readily available in other sources, but that's not true. The evidence is that SBHC construction and renovation needs have not been met through other funding. My colleagues across the aisle also claim that construction funds would be provided to centers that aren't sustainable. That's also not true. Guidelines have been developed by the Health Resources and Service Administration to ensure that no construction funds will be provided to any school-based health center that cannot document that they are sustainable now and into the future. As I said, ladies and gentlemen, school-based health centers work. They keep our young people healthy and successful in school, and they do it in a way that saves our taxpayers money. It is just common sense to support school-based centers. Again, this amendment will not kill the bill. This motion to recommit is simply a final amendment to the bill that will provide transparency to the process. I urge all members to support this motion to recommit. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas arise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to claim time in opposition to the motion to recommit.
Does the gentleman continue to reserve your point of order?
I will withdraw the point of order.
The reservation is withdrawn, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I thank the Speaker for the recognition. It's an interesting little motion to recommit, described as being benign and not changing the overall nature of the underlying legislation. So benign is the motion. And indeed, so benign is the motion to recommit that it descends into the realm of being superfluous and unnecessary. It is a motion to recommit to publish the names and locations of applicants who will not receive grants. Now look, just from this, we won't know if those grants that were not approved were just simply poorly drafted. We already have a health care law that was poorly drafted, so we know it is within the realm of someone working in the federal government to poorly draft an application for a school-based clinic. Washington's addiction to spending has become crystal clear to the American people, and the passage of this massive health care law by President Obama last year is Exhibit A. Of the thousands of problems in the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, the underlying bill, H.R. 1214, addresses but one of them, and a very small one at that. The Patient Protection Affordable Care Act provides $200 million in mandatory funding for the construction of school-based health centers. The bill eliminates this funding as our nation faces a mounting deficit and debt crisis. Funding for school-based health construction may be a good idea, maybe it's not a good idea. Maybe we should have that debate, which we didn't in the run-up to the passage of this bill. But the 111th Congress, the last Congress, did not think about it before they threw literally $200 million at the program. And, Madam Speaker, I would just point out of all of the so-called cut bills that are to remove the advanced appropriations in the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, out of all of those bills that remove advanced appropriation, it is this small little bill that has not drawn a veto threat from the White House. Madam Speaker, that leads me to believe that the President himself was embarrassed about the language that was included in the bill on this point, and the White House, now recognizing that, is not about to go out on a limb and issue a veto threat against this bill. The motion to recommit brought forward by the other side shows they simply do not realize that we have a spending problem in Washington, D.C. Congress should examine if there is a need for a program and, through regular order, rather than rushing to authorize or appropriate dollars in a feel-good piece of legislation. We hear about standing with the American families. Hey, how about standing with those American families that actually pay taxes to the federal government for a change? I urge my colleagues to vote no on the motion to recommit, yes on the underlying bill. Let's get our fiscal house back in order. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair would ask all members to avoid trafficking the well while another member is under recognition. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage.
The House is finishing up work on a bill that would repeal mandatory funding for the construction of school-based health centers. The health centers bill is one of the series of 5 Republican measures aimed at barring funding for the health care overhaul law from 2009. This is a 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit, one last chance to change the bill before final passage. Final passage is still ahead. In a couple of minutes, we're going to open up our phone lines and get your thoughts on the White House decision today, the President's announcement that he would not release the photo of Osama bin Laden's body. He made those comments during an interview that was conducted today at the White House by CBS's Steve Kroft for 60 Minutes to air this weekend. Before we get to your phone calls, though, we want to show you the comments of Jay Carney, the White House spokesman, from just a short while ago. He starts today's briefing by reading the transcript, some of the transcript of the interview between CBS and the President and what the President had to say about not releasing the photo. Here it is.
The President has made the decision not to release any of the photographs of the deceased Osama bin Laden. And rather than, first, I will give you the language the President used when he was recently interviewed about an hour ago to explain his decision. This is an interview with CBS 60 Minutes, Steve Kroft. The President was asked, well, he said that they were discussing when bin Laden's body was taken out of the compound. The President was asked about how they knew it was him. And he said, when they landed, we had very strong confirmation at that point that it was him. Photographs had been taken. Facial analysis indicated that, in fact, it was him. We hadn't yet done DNA testing, but at that point we were 95% sure. Question, did you see the pictures? The President, yes. Question, what was your reaction when you saw them? The President, it was him. Question, why didn't you release them? The President, we discussed this internally. Keep in mind that we are absolutely certain that this was him. We've done DNA sampling and testing, and so there is no doubt that we killed Osama bin Laden. It is important for us to make sure that very graphic photos of somebody who was shot in the head are not floating around as an incitement to additional violence or as a propaganda tool. That's not who we are. We don't trot out this stuff as trophies. The fact of the matter is, this was somebody who was deserving of the justice that he received. And I think Americans and people around the world are glad that he is gone. But we don't need to spike the football. And I think that given the graphic nature of these photos, it would create some national security risk. And I've discussed this with Bob Gates and Hillary Clinton and my intelligence teams, and they all agree. Question. There are people in Pakistan, for example, who say, look, this is all a lie. Obama, this is another American trick. Osama is not dead. The President. The truth is that we were monitoring worldwide reaction. There is no doubt that bin Laden is dead. Certainly, there is no doubt among al-Qaeda members that he is dead. And so we don't think that a photograph in and of itself is going to make any difference. There are going to be some folks who deny it. The fact of the matter is, you will not see bin Laden walking on this earth again.
White House spokesman Jay Carney from just a short while ago at the White House reading part of a transcript of the interview between President Obama and Steve Kroft of CBS. The President saying that he would not release the photo of Osama bin Laden's body. We'd like to get your thoughts on the President's decision. And we're opening up our phone lines to hear from you. The numbers to call, if you're a Democrat, it's 202-585-3885. Republicans, 202-585-3886. Independents and others, 202-585-3887. And make sure that you mute your television when you call in and allow 30 days in between calls. The vote on the floor of the House, a procedural vote, motion to recommit vote on one of the health care defunding bills proposed by Republicans and debated yesterday in the House. So we've got a few minutes here to take your calls. Let's go first to Everett, Washington. Jack's on our Democrats line.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on. Props to the secretary, the service secretary for the White House. It is the way to go. I'm retired Navy myself, and often we expend too much of what the people don't need to know to the people. There is a segment that just has to be kept for our national security, and I think both the president and the security folks are just spot on not releasing these photos. God bless America, and thank you.
Here's Jack in Hagerstown, Maryland, on a Republican line.
Thank you for having me on. I believe that the president should release the photos of bin Laden because right now there's doubts in our mind that this man is dead. And the only way to prove it to the American people is to release the photos and let us see them. I really believe that this is a ploy to get Obama votes in the upcoming election.
Mike is an independent in Batesville, North Carolina.
I'm just like the previous caller. I don't think he's dead unless the photos are released. I never have put any trust in anything Obama said. Just taking him at his word, to me, is just a ploy because now his ratings have shot through the roof, and he knew they would go through the roof. So until the pictures are released, I won't believe it. Thank you.
Grass Valley, California, Grass Valley, and this is Milton, Democratic caller.
Yeah, this is Milton McConnell. I believe the president made the right decision. We did what we had to do, and we don't need to stir up any more trouble. We don't understand their ways over there, and so we just need to let it lie. Thank you.
The House is wrapping up work on a bill that would repeal mandatory funding for construction of school-based health centers. This is the motion to recommit vote. We're taking your calls on the president's decision not to release the photo of Osama bin Laden, and the president made that information available during a conversation with CBS for their 60 Minutes program, which will air this weekend. Next up, Mary in Negley, Ohio. Mary's a Republican caller. Hi there.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's okay that he decided not to release the photos, but they ought to be optional for people to see if they'd like to. But I have a little different take on it because there was kind of a big jump to get all these pictures out of supposed military personnel doing abuses and things like that. They had all those pictures plastered all over the place, but now when it comes to, it happens to be somebody that people have been interested in getting for a long time, now he decides not to do it. So, you know, my take is just a little bit differently, I guess.
Let's go to Boston. Tito on our others line. Hi there.
Yes, I think the president made absolutely the right decision. We're Americans. We have values that we stand on, and it's a little weird, although that's what bin Laden deserved. It's a little weird to have people celebrating that death and wanting to see pictures and hearing people saying, "I wish they paraded him through our country," as if those are the people we are. That's who he is, and that's why he was hunted. That's not who we are.
Osama bin Laden was killed by U.S. Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Sunday in Abbottabad, Pakistan, just northeast of Islamabad. The Associated Press writes today that a House panel has approved $10.5 billion for the Special Operations Command and the Navy SEALs. They were widely praised for their mission to take out Osama bin Laden. By a voice vote today, the Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities approved its portion of the overall defense bill for the fiscal year starting October 1st. It includes money for that command. Back to phones. Here's Belmont, California, and Barbara's a Democrat there.
Hello, yes. I do not believe in killing one way or another, but I trust my president to make the decision of whether to show the photos or not. I respect his judgment, and I wish we'd get off this subject. You know, it's done, and let's get on with health care and so on. Thank you so much, C-SPAN.
Thank you. Las Lucas, New Mexico. Bob calls in on our Republican line.
Yes.
You're on the air, Bob. Go ahead.
I'm like the last lady. Let's get on with business, and let's stop violating each other, and get together and get the people's business took care of. And I think he's dead, and I think he had it coming. He didn't give any warnings for the things he did to American citizens. So I think just let a dead dog lie. Quit kicking it.
The Hill's Sam Youngman writes, the president said bin Laden deserved the justice he received at the hands of the U.S. Navy SEALs. He was shot in the head. Quote, but we don't need to spike the football, end quote. Knoxville, Tennessee, next up. And this is David, independent caller. Welcome.
Yes, I agree with the president's decision not to release the photos. I see no reason. It would serve only to infuriate radical factions. And it's as moot of a point as the birth certificate. If he releases photos, there's still going to be people that are going to say it didn't happen. So thank you, C-SPAN.
Here's Freeport, Louisiana. John's a Democratic caller there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't care which way or the other, what we do. I look at it as we've gotten 2 terroristic threats out of the way now. We need to take our troops and bring them home. We're done now. It's over. But my main concern is, where does the bounty money go now that was on bin Laden's head?
The bounty money, you said?
Yes. There was a $25 million reward out for him. Who's going to get that money now?
Good question. Let's go to New York City. Obama's going to be at Ground Zero tomorrow, and here's David calling in on our Republican line. Hi, David.
Hi. Thank you, C-SPAN, for taking my call. I think that the president is making the right decision. I think that by him releasing the picture would only infuriate a lot of radicals, if you will, and I think that by him making the decision not to release it is a good decision. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet. The president will be in New York tomorrow at Ground Zero. The Wall Street Journal reporting others invited to Thursday's ceremonies include Senator Chuck Schumer, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, and Governor Andrew Cuomo. No word on whether they all will attend. They write, the Wall Street Journal writes, conspicuously absent will be former President George W. Bush, who saw his presidency defined by the events of September 11th. Quote, President Bush appreciated the invite, but has chosen in his post-presidency to remain largely out of the spotlight, said his spokesman, David Scherzer. Let's get a couple more calls here as this vote winds down. Corey is on the line from Indianapolis. And hey there, Corey.
As far as the photos, the videos from Saddam were released, so I think that people can handle things like that. But where I'm having a big issue is this was done a week before, and that was minimized the week before it was announced. And in every speech you hear about how he wasn't a Muslim, he was a terrorist, a mass murderer. But then why, before it was even announced, were we so quick to honor the Muslim faith to wrap his body in a white sheet and throw him overboard, where all these substantiating evidence is now at the bottom of the ocean? So that's my question. Thank you. God bless.
Bristol, Virginia. Hello to Dorothy on our Democrats line.
Thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it. And I certainly do agree with our young president for not showing the pictures on TV. There are too many young children that are watching, and they do not need to be seeing that. But I appreciate our security team. I think they are great, and I appreciate everything they do for our country. And thank you for taking my call.
One more call here. Let's go to our Republican line, and David is in Venice, Florida. Go ahead, David.
Hi.
Hey there.
I think I'm a hardcore Republican, but I definitely believe he made the right decision not releasing these pictures. All it would do is give the terrorists more ammunition to use against us. There's just really no point in it. He's dead, and I don't think there's any question that the president would come out and say that he's dead unless they were sure he's dead. And it's like some of the other callers said, no matter what pictures we release, there's going to be people out there who aren't going to believe it. And the pictures would only be used against us, so there's just no point in it.
Thanks for your comments, David, and thanks for all the calls. And you can obviously continue the conversation online at cspan.org, actually on our Facebook and Twitter pages too. Facebook.com/cspan will get you there. Danny Kemp writes, Obama's watch, Obama's call. So you can feel free to continue the conversation there. More votes coming up in the House. This is the motion to recommit vote on H.R. 1214, a bill debated yesterday, which would repeal mandatory funding for the construction of school-based health centers. That was part of the health care law of 2009. You're watching live House coverage on C-SPAN.
On this vote, the yeas are 180, the nays are 230. The amendment does not the motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it.
Madam
For what
Speaker,
purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And Megan McCarthy of National Journal Daily writes today that this is another bill targeting funds in the health law, this time $100 million in funding to build school health clinics that Republicans say will not be fully staffed. This is the final vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 235 and the nays are 191. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, consideration of H.R. 3 will now resume, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 28, H.R. 3, a bill to prohibit taxpayer-funded abortions and to provide for conscience protections and for other purposes.
Now. Okay. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to prohibit taxpayer-funded abortions and to provide for conscience protections and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed to the bill.
The gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Spear of California moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 3, to the Committee on the Judiciary with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendments. Page 8, after the matter following 5, insert the following. Section 103, protection of private medical records of victims of rape and incest. Nothing in this title or the amendments made by this title shall be construed to permit the federal government to gain access to the private medical records of the victims of rape and incest. On the first page, in the matter following line 5, insert after the item relating to Section 102 the following. Section 103, protection of private medical records of victims of rape and incest.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Madam Chair, I reserve a point of order.
The gentleman reserves a point of order. Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her motion. The House will be in order. The gentlewoman deserves your attention. Please take your conversations off the floor. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At the outset, let me say the following. As a member of the Democratic caucus, there have been times in the past when I have supported Republican motions to recommit. I've done it a number of times, I confess. And I'm speaking to my Republican colleagues this afternoon, seeking to ask you to do the same, because this particular motion is very simple, very clear. It will not prevent the passage of the underlying bill. If it is adopted, it will be incorporated in the bill, and the bill will be immediately voted upon. So what does it do? It is about what every one of us care about, and that is privacy. Americans believe in privacy, and Justice Brandeis once said in a court opinion, every American has the right to be left alone. This is something we can all agree upon. My motion would simply prohibit federal agents from accessing a woman's health or other medical records because she was a victim of rape or incest. Now that's pretty simple. If you're a victim of rape or incest, no federal agency or agent will be able to access your medical records in order to prove that you, in fact, were raped or a victim of incest. Both the Hyde Amendment and this legislation specifically creates exceptions for victims of these crimes. The underlying bill would create an exception to the exception. It actually re-victimizes the victims of rape and incest by requiring them to relive their horror. Rape kits could be examined. Confidential medical records could be breached. How can we possibly ask a woman who has suffered horrific crimes to now face scrutiny by an IRS audit? Think about it. Is that what we want? Do we want women who have been victims of rape and incest to have an IRS agent knocking on their door to determine whether or not they really had a rape or were victims of an incest? We should be treating these victims like victims, not criminals.
Will suspend.
Medical privacy is a long-standing
The gentle lady will
right.
suspend. The gentle lady deserves to be heard, and I ask people to take their conversations off the floor. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Medical privacy is a long-standing and protected right for every American. Why should the right be forfeited because you are a victim of rape or incest? Let me say it one more time. Passage of this motion will not prevent passage of the bill. If it's adopted, it will be incorporated into the bill, and the bill will be taken up immediately. Madam Speaker, last month I received a call from a woman who was raped while serving in the United States Navy. You know, sometimes we get wrapped up in the words and forget about the real lives we're talking about. This member of the Navy was raped, beaten savagely, and left for dead in her quarters. She was later informed that she was pregnant and opted to have an abortion. Does anyone here believe that this woman who volunteered to serve our country should be subject to an audit by the IRS? Now, this particular Navy service person has since been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and has attempted suicide more than once. This is a real-life story of an American in uniform fighting for our freedom. We should not use the tax code to force women like this to relive their ordeal to an IRS agent. Privacy is a fundamental right, and this motion would ensure that the most vulnerable in our society has access to it. The underlying bill would unleash IRS audits on rape victims potentially, and that, my friends, is a disgrace. Let me be clear one more time. Passage of this motion will not prevent passage of the underlying bill. So though we may disagree on the bill and the issue of abortion rights in general, today we have the opportunity to speak with one voice to protect privacy of victims of rape and incest. It's really up to us. I urge everyone to vote yes on this motion to recommit, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Well, first, Madam Speaker, to withdraw my point of order.
The gentleman withdraws his reservation. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the motion to recommit in opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this motion to recommit. The amendment supposes that the bill does something that it doesn't do. Nothing in this bill allows the IRS any greater access to health information than they've ever had. HIPAA is still in place. This is simply an amendment looking for a problem that isn't there. Madam Chair, well over a dozen weakening amendments to this bill were offered at the Judiciary Committee. And the committee carefully considered and frankly dismissed most of those amendments. Likewise, opponents had a second opportunity to challenge the bill in the Ways and Means Committee, and the product is the bill before us. I've heard so much incorrect information about the bill, Madam Speaker. I would like to say to you that when the gentlelady speaks of the most vulnerable among us, I would simply say that before the sun sets today in America, 4,000 unborn children will die of abortion on demand. And in every case, a nameless little baby will die a tragic and lonely death. A mother will never be quite the same. And all the gifts that child might have brought to humanity will be lost forever. And I would like to tell you that this bill does something to prevent that same thing from happening tomorrow, but it doesn't. Madam Speaker, this bill simply says that taxpayers in the future will no longer have to pay for it or worry about their taxpayer dollars being used for that purpose. And whatever red herrings we may have heard from the opponents today, this bill does nothing more than require that abortion funding remain in the private sphere and outside the reach of government's coercive power. The bill is a very simple piece of legislation without the complexity that it's been reputed to have. And I would encourage all Americans to take a look at the underlying legislation so that you can see for yourself that this bill has no need of this motion to recommit. Unlike the Obamacare bill, this simple piece of legislation is only a few pages long and easily understandable. The new majority writes its bills this way on purpose so that members and the American people can be confident that this body is in fact carrying out the will of the people. That's exactly what this bill does, Madam Speaker, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this motion to recommit, and I would certainly yield.
But I just want to instruct the House on this motion to recommit. This motion to, it only affects Title I of the bill. All of the tax provisions are in Title II of the bill. So this does not affect any of the tax provisions in the legislation. And I yield back.
Madam Speaker, what he said, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed
Madam
to.
Speaker, I request a recorded vote.
The gentlewoman from California requests a recorded vote. A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Excuse me. Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage.
The House is voting on a motion to recommit offered by Jackie Speier of California to a bill that would block taxpayer funding of abortion, including tax breaks or subsidies for insurance plans. This motion to recommit vote is 15 minutes. It'll be followed by a final passage vote. We spoke earlier today to a Capitol Hill reporter for some details on the abortion funding bill. We're joined by Julie Rovner of NPR. How does this House abortion funding bill propose to change current law?
Well, of course, the backers of it say what it merely does is writes into permanent policy the Hyde Amendment, which, of course, is the annual funding restriction that gets put into the labor HHS appropriation bill every year that bans federal abortion funding. But what opponents say is that it goes considerably further than that. Specifically, what it does is it limits tax subsidies for people who have abortion as part of a health insurance policy, and of course many people do. Now, this isn't everyone. These are mostly individuals and small businesses who buy insurance, who have abortion as part of a health insurance policy, or people who might pay for an abortion using a tax-preferred account. That would be a flexible spending account or a health reimbursement arrangement or one of those kinds of accounts, and that would now be banned. So there would be no more sort of tax subsidy for anything that has to do with an abortion, either directly paying for an abortion or a health insurance policy that would cover abortion. And that, of course, has never been affected by the Hyde Amendment before. The Hyde Amendment has only applied to direct federal funding of abortion. So this is definitely breaking new ground for federal abortion funding bans.
What can you tell us about the arguments opponents have against this bill?
Well, of course, they're saying that this would be really a tax penalty, and it would raise taxes for a lot of people, and indeed it would. And we've already seen some concern concerns raised by small businesses. They're saying that, you know, a lot of times coverage of abortion is kind of buried within other things, and they might not even be aware that they have it. They might have to drop their existing health insurance policy, buy new policies, get, you know, re-underwritten as it would, which can be expensive, and that this is really not this would result in a big paperwork burden, a big time burden, that they could end up inadvertently losing tax credits and subsidies that they now have. And of course there are then abortion rights backers who say that this is really sort of a grab at women's ability to use their own private money to exercise, you know, their right to what is still a legal medical procedure.
What sort of quandary does this present to Democrats who would normally vote for many anti-abortion bills that come up in the House?
Well, you know, it is a difficult vote for certainly some anti-abortion Democrats, and I would think for some, you know, sort of anti-abortion Republicans too. They want to side with, you know, their anti-abortion constituents, but they also want to side with their small business constituents, and this does put them a bit at odds. Also, I think there was some trouble with the drafting of this bill when it got to the Ways and Means Committee. The head of the Joint Committee on Taxation said that it wasn't drafted quite, I think, as sponsors thought. It could affect more small businesses than they'd intended. There's also sort of the awkwardness of you've got the possibility, because there are still exemptions for rape and incest, you'd have the possibility of, you know, the IRS having to become sort of the abortion police, finding out if someone's trying to actually claim a tax, you know, some kind of a tax preference for an abortion. Was this really the result of rape or incest? And, you know, do you have the documentation to prove it? That could be awkward.
Well, assuming it passes the House today, what chances does the bill have in the Senate?
Well, no one thinks it has too much of a chance in the Senate, but of course there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about this in the Senate, would like to see it brought up. So you could see it, you know, you could see people trying to attach it to something, or trying to attach it to something that's must pass, or trying to attach it, for instance, to, you know, to the debt ceiling negotiation. So, you know, one wouldn't necessarily say it has no chance in the Senate. The president has issued a veto threat on it, but again, you know, President Clinton, who was also, you know, in favor of abortion rights, ended up signing many anti-abortion restrictions into law, even though he didn't want to, because they came to his desk attached to other things that he basically had to sign. So that's not to say that this bill has no chance.
Well, in addition to the abortion funding bill, the House is back at work on bills repealing parts of the health care law, the funding for parts of the health care law. What have they done so far this week? What do they work on today?
Well, yesterday they passed 238 to 183, a bill that would rescind funding for planning grants for states to try and start to get up and running these exchanges, the marketplaces that would help people, again, individuals and small businesses, buy health insurance. And this is starting in 2014 when the requirement comes online that people have insurance. This is kind of ironic, if you will. Yes, the CBO said it would save $14 billion, and that's because it would kind of delay these exchanges from getting up and running. But the CBO also said that it would have the effect of the federal government ending up running a lot of these exchanges instead of the states. Well, of course, the Republicans who are pushing this bill have said that they don't like the idea of the federal government having so much control over the healthcare system, and yet this bill would result in the federal government having more control over the healthcare system. But again, this is part of this Republican effort to, if they can't repeal the entire law, they'd like to repeal pieces of the law. And they're also debating another bill that they will vote on that would rescind a very small piece, $100 million for construction grants, basically for school-based health clinics.
Keeping an eye on the health care debate and more. Julie Rovner with NPR. Thank you for that update.
You're welcome.
And just a short while ago on the House floor, they voted to repeal mandatory funding for the construction of school-based health centers. H.R. 1214, the vote there was 235 to 191. 4 Republicans opposed taxpayer funding of abortion, and this is the motion to recommit vote. 15-minute vote on the House floor. Final passage is next. This afternoon, President Obama said he's decided not to release the death photos of terrorist Osama bin Laden because their graphic nature could incite violence and create national security risks for the United States. Quote, "There's no doubt we killed Osama bin Laden," the president said in an interview with CBS News. He said he had seen the death photo and there was no need to release the photograph or to gloat. Quote, "There's no need to spike the football." That interview with CBS will air on 60 Minutes this Sunday. Before that, though, his CIA director, Leon Panetta, was on Capitol Hill meeting with senators and briefing them on the killing of Osama bin Laden. We're going to hear remarks from Armed Services Committee Ranking Member John McCain and also by the Intelligence Committee Chairman Dianne Feinstein. They spoke to reporters following that meeting with the CIA director. It was shortly after this meeting that the White House made the announcement that they won't release the photos. Comments first by Senator McCain and then Senator Feinstein.
Honestly, it was an excellent briefing. We're proud of the performance of our military, and they did an outstanding job.
But did you talk about, there've been a lot of...
I'm not going to discuss what we discuss in code word.
But foreign aid to Pakistan, some people are saying this is a time to reconsider, restructure. Is that fair?
I think we need to find out what the extent of knowledge of Osama bin Laden's presence there, and we don't know that yet on the part of the Pakistani authorities, and I'm sure we will be able to ascertain that over time. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions.
There's a debate over enhanced interrogation and whether or not that played a role in the leads.
The information, I stand on the side of the United States, standing by the Geneva Conventions of which we are signatories, which we were in violation of by waterboarding. There is information, published information in the various newspapers and media that the information about this courier was an intercept of conversations between two individuals. That's as far as I know. So far I know of no information that was obtained which would have been useful that by, quote, enhanced interrogation. In fact, apparently, according to published reports, not according to this briefing, but according to published reports, that some of the key people who knew about this courier denied it. We're obviously not telling the truth.
Should the administration release the photo of Osama bin Laden?
That's a judgment that has to be made by the president and taking all things into consideration. My initial opinion is that it's not necessary to do so. I think there's ample proof that this was Osama bin Laden, but I will defer to the judgment of the President of the United States.
How concerned are you, though, that the
Have
photos...
you seen the photo or the video?
No.
How concerned are you, though, that a release of the photos might inflame passions around the world with people who are
It's a
sympathetic
judgment the
to
President has to
Can
make.
I ask one question? You've actually spent time in Waziristan. You've spent probably more time in that region
I've
than
been to
anybody
Waziristan.
here. Than anybody here, and you know the Pakistanis. What do you, in your heart of hearts, what do you believe in terms of their true level of cooperation and knowledge about this in their presence?
My true belief about Pakistan is that they are concerned that the United States of America will not remain in the region. And for a long time now, they have maintained ties through the ISI with various elements within Afghanistan, including the Haqqani network. That is a source of great concern to all of us. There have also been a number of areas where we have received significant cooperation from the Pakistanis as well. They are a nation with a nuclear arsenal, which complicates our relationship and our approach to Pakistan. So it's a very complicated situation. But first, I think it's important we find out whether the Pakistanis had knowledge of Osama bin Laden being located where he was.
What's being
Thank
done
you.
to find that out? Thanks a
Oh,
lot.
I'm sure we have many others. Thanks, Larry.
We just completed a 2-hour briefing, which was a joint briefing with the Armed Services Committee and Intelligence. In my 10 years on the committee, it's the first time this has been done. Leon Panetta, Admiral McCraven, Mike Leiter addressed the committee, and because this is a highly classified meeting, I'm not going to say anything about the details except to say that I think it was a very thorough and substantial briefing.
Senator, separate from this briefing, we understand that some senators have seen the photos of Osama bin Laden. Have you?
No.
Do you want they should be released?
I can't answer that question right now. I have not seen them, so I don't know. But I don't think that the timing is such that something incendiary is the right thing to do.
Senator, can I ask you why you have not seen the photos?
Oh,
I mean,
please.
but other members of the Intelligence Committee have, and of the Armed Services Committee have told us they've seen it. Why hasn't the chair of the Intelligence Committee seen it? Have you chosen not to at this point?
No, I have not chosen. We have asked for them, and I'm sure I will be able to see them. I don't need to see them at any special time. I'm convinced it was Osama bin Laden. The DNA is conclusive, and that's the case.
Senator, you had a lot of questions yesterday about Pakistan, what they knew, when they knew it. Do you feel you have a better idea at this point of how that compound could have existed with such a high-level al-Qaeda militant living inside for, as you said, up to 6 years?
Well, I have a strong feeling. I'm not going to express it. I don't have enough factual information, and therefore, until I have the factual information, I'd like to say nothing about it.
What's being done to get that factual information?
I think whether Pakistan was complicit in allowing Osama bin Laden and his family and 2 couriers and one of their families to live there for 6 years will be ferreted out. And it'll be ferreted out with fact of either they were or they weren't. But we're not there quite yet.
Should aid be suspended until you do find out?
No, I'm not going to get into that
Senator,
right
are there
now.
any accounts of the action that you can share with us?
I'd rather not, because you guys are so good and you know how to press the question that one question leads to another and another and another.
So there's nothing.
So I would rather not.
Do you have any sense at this briefing of the value and content of what was taken from the compound or taken from bin Laden's person?
I think substantial materials were taken from the compound.
Can you say, is there anything in those materials that suggests future al-Qaeda activity,
I don't
future
know.
attacks, or anything?
Have you made a decision on a public?
Not at this time.
Thanks, everyone. Senator, have you learned anything about the tradition of that would change your views of whether enhanced interrogation was used?
And again, since that briefing, President Obama has said he will not release the death photos of Osama bin Laden because of their graphic nature and thinking that they could incite violence and create national security risks for the U.S. He made those comments in an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes to air this weekend. Here on the House floor, vote on a motion to recommit on a bill that would block taxpayer funding of abortion, including tax breaks or subsidies for insurance plans. This is the motion to recommit vote. Final passage is next.
On this vote, the ayes are 192 and the nays are 235. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado arise?
Madam Speaker, I ask for recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise.